hello there, Amy. How are you doing?
Hey, Mike. I'm doing pretty good. I've had a whirlwind of 2 weeks, but happy to be here talking to you.
I'm glad to hear. Well, you're in a hot part of the world. I'm in a cold part of the world. So,
Oh,
yeah, it's cool. It's been pretty cool in Melbourne.
yeah.
It's winter
I mean,
here.
it's starting to cool off a little bit here in Maryland. And I mean, I love the fall. I love the fall. I love the smells. I love the temperature. I love pumpkin, and all the things. But I also love the summer and I hate the winter. So I do get a little sad when it starts to cool off too.
Well, there you go. Well, I'm looking forward to a drier time because when it in Melbourne, winters are just wet. It's like
Oh,
constantly wet,
mm,
and it's
that's depressing, Mike.
it's depressing. It's mostly wet,
Yeah.
but it's starting to get a little bit drier. And hopefully summer is on its way. Hopefully we don't burn the country down as has become an annual festival here.
Mm.
But beyond those pleasantries, I want to know, Amy, have you
Mm.
seen anyone recently destroying any children's toys on stage at a church? Since I saw this video of a guy called Greg Locke, apparently a big MAGA
Mm.
pastor, using a baseball bat with a Bible attached to it
Mm.
to destroy a
Yes, quite a
Barbie
weapon,
house.
quite a weapon. I mean, I've heard about weaponizing scripture before, but this is like literally turning it into a weapon
That is literally where I mean, gives
during a
the
sermon.
yeah, it's like gives the definition of Bible bashing a whole new meaning.
Yes. And I can't imagine the poor children who were in the congregation watching Barbie's house get destroyed.
Yeah, yeah. And in terms of, I've seen some weird sermon illustrations in my life, like visible ones that required parables.
Yes,
Uh, yeah,
I've
that
seen
was
some
weird.
weird ones as well.
That was weird.
Yeah, I don't I mean, there's some strong opinions about the Barbie movie,
What?
and
I
it's
know, but
kind of
what?
polarizing.
Yes, and what do you think it is fitting to destroy in the pulp? I mean, what children's toys should be destroyed?
Well, I'll have to say, as much as I love Play-Doh, love the smell of it, love to play with Play-Doh myself, don't want my kids getting Play-Doh in church. When they were little, oh my goodness, it got on everything.
Yeah, and it
So
rubs into the
that,
couch and everything and in
yes,
here. Ugh.
and their clothes, yeah, hair. So that, the car ride home, that I could see.
Actually,
What about you?
there is one thing I would like to destroy in church with a baseball bat, and I would be talking about Satan and evil powers and empire. And do you know what the thing I would like to destroy in front of everyone?
What is
The
it,
baseball
Mike?
bat? A coffee machine, Amy. I would
Oh,
love
brother.
I would love to destroy the coffee machine because we all know that
You will be the Grinch of church.
well, yeah, I mean, I think we should
Do
have
you want
tea.
people to be awake during the sermon?
I just, I just think we should all be drinking tea. I just can't stand the coffee, and everyone,
Mike, don't
bring
be a
people bring
hater.
their little coffee cups into church, which I think is
Yeah,
an
I know.
abomination. So I,
So that's a real distraction for you.
oh, just the horrible smell. It's, ugh.
Ah, it smells delicious, divine.
For you, I guess. For you, I guess. Well, anyway, speaking of things we bring into church, I
Yeah.
wrote a couple of articles on my Substack
Hmm.
talking about advice to complementarians in egalitarian churches, things to
Hmm.
look out for, but also advice to egalitarians who are attending a complementarian church. And what I have here is like, imagine you're like a military family, you're stationed somewhere, you move around every few years, and there's a limited number of churches that you can choose from if you like, and sometimes you find a particular church where you find this is the best place to go, but it's maybe not where I'm at in my convictions about gender roles, ministry, family, marriage, that type of thing. I mean, and this can swing both ways. Now
Hmm.
I wrote a an article on this, particularly advice for egalitarians and complementarian churches, and basically it was like, don't allow anyone to bully you, but at the same time, don't make it your mission in life to convert them to being, egalitarian. Um, and I was kind of saying, play it safe, tell people what you think when it comes up and that kind of a thing. Now, you did have a response, which I thought was very, very reasoned and thoughtful. What was your response to what I wrote there, Aimee?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I only responded because you asked me what I thought about
That
it.
is true. That is true. I did invite you. This wasn't out of the blue. This
You
wasn't
invited me.
wasn't
So,
grabbing you
and
by
I,
the scruff of the neck and saying,
right.
"Listen up, Bird."
Yeah. And I appreciate that because I think that you do look for other voices on these kind of conversations. And so, from people who would come at it from a different posture, position, point of view, experience, and which I do. And so when I read your article, I thought, okay, this is diplomatic, and this is even could be pastoral advice. But the whole time in my head, I'm thinking, if you're a man, because it's just a completely different experience. If you're a woman, egalitarian, or a woman who wants to contribute in the theological heart of the church, um, who likes to read scripture, any of those things, um, I think it would be very different. And so, I'm coming at it, reading it on the other side. I was a believer in all that. And, when I really had to access the government of the church for harassment and slander, at a pretty bad level, I went through a 2-year process that was completely traumatizing. And so the whole system was revealed to me to be something very different than I thought it was, and to be unsafe. So for me, I guess the whole premise of the question is disturbing, honestly. Like, and I want to be friendly to complementarians and as fair as I can, but I'm looking at it thinking, why would I can't even, my whole family can't enter those spaces.
Hmm.
They're just not safe. My whole body screams, you're not safe going into a complementarian space. So for me, I see it as a complicity, really, with a system that's harmful. So, yeah, I mean, I had a different take on answering that question. I feel like I'd want to share a more personal story with what I went through. And I've just heard so many of those stories now
Hmm.
from so many different complementarian churches. And, I get so many people that are still in them
Hmm.
saying, should I go through this process to address harm? And my advice is no. My advice is this is going to take like 2 years. Well, if you're in a Presbyterian setting, it's different in a Southern Baptist or Baptist complementarian churches. Their government's different, so it'd be faster. But yeah, I feel like there's a lot of harm, but not only harm. Maybe you're thinking, well, okay, you're talking worst case scenario, but I think the whole church is harmed by, and it even changes like our the way that we read scripture. Hermeneutics is a social event, really.
Yeah.
So if you're hearing from the men and being taught only by the men, and scriptures read only by the men, and the prayers are by the men, um, not all complementarian churches follow that strict of it, but I don't think that the word of Christ is then really free from person to person. And I think that the church has been malnourished in a lot of ways, and it affects how we read scripture.
Yeah.
So, I think that there's some serious things to think about what you're trading
Yeah.
when you're going in.
I mean, what I want to say is that some of us do live in sort of these mixed environments. Like,
Mm-hmm.
like I have students, I can have a class of students. Some will be complementarian, some will be egalitarian. And I'll have like complementarian female students who I would love to see to go into pastoral ministry because I think they're very
Yeah.
gifted and very capable, but they don't want to do that. And
Right.
then I've also got some egalitarian students who would be really good, but because of their egalitarian views, they're not the best fit for some of the churches where it would be good to send them. So this is
Hmm.
this is something we've got to. I'm trying to negotiate
Yeah.
as a theological educator who's also helping people find out what is their philosophy of ministry. I mean, and what do you do if you're part of a leadership team where you or a church where you will have different views in the church. I mean, even complementarians have different views on themselves. Egalitarians
Oh
have
yeah.
different views
Oh yeah.
amongst themselves.
Hmm.
And if you can't deal with differences within your flavor, then
Hmm.
you're not gonna be able to deal with differences when you're looking at different somewhat groups, interpretations, or sections of the church. So I'm very much trying to get people to find a way to, I mean, kind of live and let live in the
Yeah.
places and spaces they find themselves as best they can. But I do recognize that you can get certain species of complementarianism. And again, for me, let me offer the caveat: not everyone, but there are certain species of complementarianism that are in a toxic place with very toxic outcomes. Now, I mean, I tend to use the language of complementarianism does not necessarily lead to a pernicious patriarchy, but it's definitely an amplifying force in that regard. So I've usually emphasized the amplifying, and it's more conducive to be taking in these toxic and harmful directions. Now, I have to say that because I've got some great complementarian colleagues and students who are very supportive of of all their students and all their things. So I guess I'm trying to negotiate, a land of diversity and difference on this. But what I'm hearing from you, Aimee, is that based on personal experience and some of the effort of going into it, that can be a hard sell. It can be a hard sell if you've been through this trauma, and if you're wanting to invest in a church where you've either got the risk or the reality that no matter how nice and cordial and open you are, there's going to be barriers or there's going to be an inevitable level of hostility, particularly for women. So I'm a theologian, relatively well known. I can, if I get invited to someone's Bible study, I'm going to be treated with a certain degree of respect just because
Right.
of my professional qualifications.
Hmm.
Whereas, for someone else, someone who's like a, female first year freshman student, or, a young mother, or just a young person early in their career, or even maybe an older person who's just been in the church, an older female lady, they don't have the defense of being male and being a professional biblical scholar. So, I mean, do you have any thoughts about these sort of these mixed spaces where these village
Hmm.
greens where you do get complementarians and egalitarians hanging out
Yeah.
together or coming across each other?
Yeah. I mean, I have respect for so many complementarian people, or people who hold complementarian convictions. And I'm friends, with many. But I guess specifically with the question about if somebody is an egalitarian and you're giving them advice about going into a complementarian church, that's more specifically speaking, I think, is where I would, respond the way that I did more in my article or response to you on my blog. But yeah, in mixed, it just depends on where you are, the context. I can be a lot more diplomatic um, outside of the church. But if I'm trying to worship and be part of a covenant community, like this is our interpretive communities. This is where we're to serve. And when you're viewed as a threat and your voice needs to be managed constantly, and you're just cut off from so many of the spaces, that's a real problem. And so I would think that if you already have egalitarian convictions, that should really bother you.
Yeah.
And so that's where, I would say, like, where you're going to worship then is going to make a big difference. And I think you could have more influence outside of those spaces then. And, I don't want to say, oh, I can't learn from complementarians because, man, I really still do. But, and it really affects, I think, what you can learn, what you can contribute, and even how safe you are, And so, I thought, Mike, I thought I was in one of those good complementarian churches. I thought that that we weren't, that was fringe, all that very patriarchal teaching. And so it was very disorienting, and then caused a lot of disillusionment. I mean, there's so many layers to this.
Yeah.
Take away the complementarian, egalitarian part. I think that, well, and it is kind of goes along with this hierarchy thing, but one hugely disillusioned thing for me was to find out how spiritually immature the leaders are. I mean, you just expect spiritual maturity in leadership. And to find how much everything is about this hierarchical authority, and that, seminary, okay, they went to seminary and got a bunch of information, but that doesn't guarantee spiritual maturity, which has a direct correlation to the way we read scripture, our spiritual maturity. And so, as a woman in her 40s, that was shocking to me. So, that's a huge layer of it. And, this woman just wrote me today about, she appreciated my work on friendship between the sexes, but she wanted to know if I'd considered writing about friendship between women in complementarian churches, because what she's seeing is a direct correlation with this patriarchal teaching in complementarian churches and this obsession with authority, that women even take that on in our relationships with each other. So you see this constant, like, I need to mentor you. Like, like it's not just a coffee. it's a, you're being mentored kind of thing. And that this hierarchical framework enters into all our relationships, not just man to woman, but woman to woman, and to child, and all that. So I think there's a lot of layers to it, that it's a lot bigger than the little things the little differences that we want to say that it is.
Okay. That's
I don't know, that was a lot of rambling, but
no. I
yeah,
mean,
I just
I'm thinking like a whole bunch of different things. Like one of the places where this has been an issue is in university ministries, where these are not churches, although they can have like Bible teaching, hours. Some of them do create their own little sort of their own churches or their own worship thing, particularly for,
right,
for some of these remote universities in like, in remote towns in Australia where you've got like, you've got like a population of 30,000 in the town, and there's a university and a hospital, and you've got these kids who for them the university group becomes their like church, and they
yeah,
have a Sunday service, and those leaders have been, I mean, I know numerous places where they're wrestling with the sort of gender roles and issues and authority, and the parents sent them off to this university and this college because they thought it was a good a good Christian group on campus, and then they found out that women are being allowed to preach, and it's so there's been a lot of politics in the Australian Christian university scene, about how prescriptive they have to be on gender roles for each. Is each particular chapter allowed to make up its own mind on this, or do they have like a top down, and different sort of Christian student associations in Australia have really wrestled with this. Are we a church? Are we not a church? Are we a ministry? Are we parachurch? Then how do we need to take a stand on this issue? Do we need to have a conviction on this? And you can imagine it's quite messy. The issues about are we a church? Are we not a church? Do we have to be complementarian or egalitarian? Do we have to pick a side? It's been a very very complex place. But I like what you said about relationships between women. Um, my dear wife Naomi used to be part of a thing called the women's ministry, like the, it was, how to describe it, it was basically for the wives of ministers. It was like a group for them. It was like the pastors ministry wives network, ministry wives network, and it was a kind of a group, and it was kind of good. They would do their own conference, they would do their own thing. I wouldn't have said there was necessarily a hierarchy in it, but it did have its own culture. It did have its own kind of way of doing things. And I mean, my wife Naomi got a lot out of it in the times that she was there. But it was this kind of, it was its own thing. It was, and it did have its own kind of culture that I thought was interesting. And every now and again, the husbands would come in and we'd catch up with. It was a bit like a seminary reunion sometimes. I guess you see the different
Hmm.
people. But studying the sociology of that, I think, would definitely be interesting, and and how that is a mirror, a replica, or an innovation, or a transformation of normal church culture. So I wonder if the sort of the ministry wives environment, what does that tell us about complementarian culture, the varieties,
Hmm.
the diversities, the structure,
Hmm.
in whose hands does power really lie, um,
Yeah,
in some sense. So that
a lot of
that'd be,
questions there.
yeah, that'd be an interesting thing. I mean, are you tempted to explore this thing about relationships between women in complementary?
A little bit, like when she, I read this email thinking, oh, she's really hitting on something here, and she wondered if I'd want to write about, friendships with women, but I don't know.
You got
I'm
other things
trying
to
to
write
like
on. You got other things to write
I'm
on.
just trying to back out of some of that environment. So it is very interesting coming from where I came from, you know, who tried to actually write a book um, directed to church leaders saying, invest in your women as disciples in the church. Like, I wasn't even hitting the leadership stuff, like ordained ministry kind of thing, but just like what is a disciple? What does a disciple do? And are women disciples, less than male disciples? Like, are we not allowed to be disciples? And what is the great honor and privilege of being a sister in the church in that way as a layperson? Um, I was, labeled as very dangerous for doing that. So I mean, to me, it just revealed, okay, I can write within the the bounds of the Westminster Confession of Faith, and it's not. It doesn't mean the same thing for women that it means for men.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. I guess if I had to pick,
It's just fake.
yeah, yeah, that is true. That is true. Yeah, we can kind of spin it any way we like. I mean, yeah, people can say, well, these are the bounds that you're free to move in our confessional.
But you're not,
But
because
exactly,
you're a woman.
there's the boundaries, and then there's the invisible boundaries. There's
Right. And
the
that's what I
invisible
talk about.
rules,
It's
which
like
is why you've
I
got to
hit a
see
lot
the.
of invisible fences.
That's why you've got to see the Barbie movie, because there's a whole monologue about the invisible rules that women are bound by.
Oh, yeah, that's true.
The invisible rules. Yeah.
Yeah.
Always have to be thankful. Always.
Mm.
Stuff like that. So, okay.
Right, right.
Well, I guess, I mean,
Yeah, I know.
if I did have to pick a book I'd like to see, I think the one I would like to hear a book on, or even a talk, is on male fragility. The sort of the
There is
fear.
one. What's it called? Men explain things to me.
Explain things to me. Yeah,
I
maybe
mean, that's
something.
not a Christian book, but
Yeah,
very feminist.
yeah, maybe something about well, not all complementarian, but the somewhat fear men have of women, or of being perceived as being womanlike. Um,
Mm.
I think that is a big thing. That is a big thing.
Yeah,
Because,
and just how misogynist is that?
yeah, well, I mean, well, here's the thing. You might be surprised to know, Amy, that I have some interests and attributes that are very masculine. Like I'm very good at sports. I used to be a paratrooper in the army, but I
Hmm.
I also kind of like musical theater, and
Mm-hmm.
I hate
I'm not
fishing.
surprised.
I hate fishing, and I have
Yeah.
no interest in cars. I like, you if
Okay.
you lift up the hood or the what you call it, the hood, you call it the hood or the
Yes, good.
hood.
I know
You
that.
look under that, like I can say it. That's definitely an engine. There's no doubt about it. I can change oil. I can fill the water. The winds,
All right,
the
good,
winds,
good. That's
the
about the extent of what I can do.
yeah, the winds. But I am less. But for anything else, like if you want to change spark plugs or something, I'm going to watch a lot of YouTube videos
Right,
in order
right.
to do that. So, I think not everyone meets the stereotype of either being male or female, and that there is that kind of thing, and I think men do get a little bit fragile, that they won't be perceived as being as manly or as male as the rest of their peers, because they might like something ranging from gymnastics to art to, yeah. I
Hmm.
mean, I do wonder whether that's something to be looked at one day, but that's probably for someone else to do. That's probably for someone else to do. So, but there we are. But
I don't know. Maybe I'll write an article.
yeah, maybe I will. Maybe I will do something on male fragility, or the
Sounds
the, the
sounds
fear of
good.
not being perceived as male enough by your colleagues. So, yeah, well, I'll give it a go. Maybe in the future. Maybe in the future, Aimee. But anyway, Aimee, for people who are very interested in you and what you do, what's new in your world?
Well, I just got back from Grand Rapids and I got to film some videos on my upcoming book, The Hope in Our Scars. And that's about the church rising from disillusionment and being able to see Christ in it, from the underground, is what I call it. So I'm doing a video series too that goes, it's separate from the book. So it's like for the Zondervan Academy. And so I recorded videos for that and had quite a heck of a time getting there, flying there. Flying is no fun anymore. Not that it ever was.
Yeah.
But missed my second connecting flight and had to get an Uber because it was too late to rent a car. It's like 2 a.m. And here you are, like here I am, a woman traveling alone in the city at night, going to a house in a secluded area, an Airbnb on the river. And I have to get an Uber. So that's kind of scary. I did that. Uh, and the guy's name's Gordon. I'm like, that's the name of the serial killer right there. Gordon. So he's dropping me off 2 a.m. and it's creepy where I'm going at night and very dark. And he says, you know, this reminds me of a blind date I went on a long time ago where I had a good time, dropped her off, and a couple hours later, her mom called me asking if I knew where she was. And turns out she'd gone missing. He's
It's
telling me this
exactly
as
what
he's
what you want to
helping me
hear.
get my suitcase out of the trunk. So turns out she was missing for 3 days. He's like, oh, she was alive. She was alive. Turns out she drove to Florida with a girlfriend or something, but I think she was trying to escape her family. But anyway, all that to say, 2 a.m. I got up at 8 o'clock to do my videos. And the next day, I had the pleasure, though, so I'm doing some discussions on the chapters with different people because I feel like the book really, you can get a even greater benefit, I think, if you were to read it in a discussion, have a discussion group that you're doing it with. And so we wanted to model that a little bit in some additional videos. So I recorded 2 chapters with Kristen Dumais, which was a lot of fun, and also 2 chapters with Chuck DeGroat, which was the first time I met Chuck, and what a pleasure that was too. So I had a really good time. That was the really fun part, was being able to do discussions, because I don't really like reading from a monitor and staring at a computer with everybody staring at you, staring at a camera. Not my most comfortable thing to do.
Yeah, I can imagine. Well, it sounds like it'll be a great video series, Aimee.
Thank
That'll be
you.
terrific. Well,
What
what's
about you?
me? Oh, well, so many things. I've been made deputy principal at my college, so I'm doing a lot more
Yeah.
admin stuff, trying to provide
Mm-hmm.
leadership. Um, Wrote a book with N.T. Wright, Jesus and the Powers. So that's something that's
Ooh.
coming out in the future. Introduction to Luke Acts is coming out, and I'm gradually working on a book about the historical Jesus, about life of Jesus,
Nice.
and I want to write. I'm slowly writing a book about the Roman Empire in the third century. Um,
Wow.
because so yeah, wide ranging interests, and also working on my plan to gradually steal all the world's coffee beans. But that last one's taking a while. It's taking a while.
Yeah,
There's a lot of
yeah.
coffee
You're
beans
gonna
out
have
there.
to
A lot of
pry
coffee.
those from my hands.
Cold dead hands. Don't worry.
Yeah,
I'll just
cold dead hands.
I'll just send in Gordon to go get them. Uh,
Yes.
yeah, that's good. Well,
Oh,
Aimee, it's always a pleasure talking with you, and yeah,
you as well.
and we'll catch. Well, I guess I'll catch you, and we'll catch everyone on the next time we have another episode of Birds of a Feather.